Welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending where in the world you're joining from. This is the third hackathon in the Teaching Toolset series, all about reshaping how we think about tools and pedagogy and the connection between them, led by the fabulous storyteller in residence, Tom Hames. One quick announcement before we go in from the ShapingEDU world. We have our unconference coming up in July. We are going to be reshaping wicked problems. We've got a slate of 9 wicked problems, these complex issues and topics with competing values that need to be negotiated. And we're going to spend a couple days digging into them and making actionable outputs around them. We're also going to spend a day playing with black swans, growing our ability to deal with surprises and with chaos and pivot and come out better on the other side, plus a few fun mystery themed surprises along the way. So I'll throw the link to register in the chat if you haven't already. It's free, open to the public, and we hope to see you at our remote inn haunted by wicked problems. Okay, enough from me. Tom, what are we up to today?
Okay, well, moving right along to the third hackathon. Actually, I'll go ahead and pull up my slides here. I have a little intro as usual, sort of get you thinking along the road here. And I think I've sussed this problem as far as advancing the slides, but yell at me if for some reason the slides don't advance. Also feel free to drop things in the chat if you have questions. And we will also circle back around to the unconference and what we're going to be looking at, because one of those wicked problems is apparently we have a Frankenstein problem with tools. So actually, I see that as an advantage. We can give it life. Okay, so on to part 3. For those of you that have joined me for parts 1 and 2, apologies for a little bit of looking backward, because I do feel like it's helpful to sort of get a sense of where we've been. You will really see where we've been when we go and look at the Mural Board, because that has all of the work so far as we've accumulated. And as those of you who were here a few weeks ago, you will notice that I've done a little bit of cleanup, hidden the dirty laundry, so to speak, but just tried to untangle the monster that we've created, and that's been a lot of fun. There's still a lot more work to be done there, and we'll talk about that toward the end. So, okay, so this is sort of the grid. And I've had some, comments even on that. Jim Vanitas, who I don't think is here today, but commented on the board about, maybe there's some things that don't neatly fit into these categories. I expect there's going to be a lot of bleed anyway. I think, but it's helpful to have a framework to work off of as we improvise, because otherwise, it's really hard to get a straight. To sort out what we're talking about. And that's what the goal is here, is to create a more straightforward way of looking at tools, as opposed to having the tools drive that conversation. Some thoughts from the earlier hackathons, just sort of in general things. And I went through this in the blog I wrote the other day, the one from going through the looking glass, not the one from like yesterday, but one is that some things that came up from the conversations came up from me looking at the different tables, the different connections that people were making, is the extent to which we're still in that mode where the technology is driving the task. Instead of connecting the task back to the technology, a lot of people went from the technology and said, oh, okay, I can use it for this task. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it's important that we're aware of it, what that's doing to us and how that shapes our conversations. Because instead of imagining what's possible, we're imagining in some ways what the technology allows us to do. The other thing is, being able to see the challenge differently. As I said, the Mural Board had created some interesting insights that certainly made me think about this problem a little differently. And if there are other patterns as we've reshuffled this, please let me know, because I don't see every pattern there is to see, and I'm pretty good at finding patterns, but I'm certainly not omniscient in that way. So on to today's. How do we, why did I have XR in kind of a different topic? The original two hackathons were very clearly divided, or somewhat clearly divided, into basically synchronous and asynchronous tools. And that kind of makes sense. We're either in a situation like we are right now, where we're talking to each other live, we're interacting in a live way, or we're working asynchronously over time. And one of the goals of the hackathon is to sort of blend the two in ways that I think a lot of time that we haven't really done much before. And again, this grows out of the pandemic and weird ways in which I've tried to figure out how to use tools in different ways. But I think there's something more fundamental about XR, because it kind of does both. You can think of it both as a synchronous tool where people come together in virtual environments, but you can also preserve it in a way that a lot of time in an interactive way that's a little different from what you could do, say, with a recorded Zoom video or something like that. And in all of these things, we're trying to figure out where these connections are, look at problems in different ways. And I think that's the really exciting thing about what we can use our tools for. And this goes, going all the way back to Vannevar Bush in 1945, the key thing in his article that he was talking about there were these breadcrumbs. They weren't the pieces of knowledge themselves. His problem was he had tons of information, he had tons of inputs, but understanding how they connected up to each other and being able to reshuffle those connections and say, hey, let's, this guy's working on this part of the problem. He's not even talking to this guy over here, but I see this connection that I didn't realize was there. How can I put them together in a way that will create something new? How do I do that? How do I connect up ideas that don't necessarily seem to go together, but if you look at them in the right way, suddenly they do, right? That's what he's going on about. And this is something it's a thread that's kind of been lost over the years. There are a lot of people who realize this, but nobody's really ever been able to figure out how to operationalize this in a very effective manner. Doug Engelbart talked about this. Ted Nelson talks about this. Ted Nelson actually has been trying for the last 50 plus years now to create a system that shows these breadcrumbs. That's what Xanadu is all about. But it's just proven to be conceptually difficult to envision. I actually kind of think his Xanadu project, which is, Ted Nelson, for those of you that don't know, came up with the term hyperlink in the first place back in the 1960s. And his mind was thinking about those connections. But when they actually made their way to reality in Tim Berners-Lee conception of it, and Tim Berners-Lee recognized the weaknesses of his system. I'm not dinging on him, but that was what technology allowed him to do in 1989. That we were getting chunks of information, but this idea of these invisible connections was being lost in the process. I also tie this again in a blog, the one I published yesterday, to our dependence on paper as a metaphor, and how much of the stuff that we deal with, even in a virtual sense, is still paper-like in many ways. Okay, and paper is limited. It's a fabulous. It's what we've built civilization on, but it does have its limits. And thinking of it as thinking of information in a two-dimensional space always is going to have some limits. And I think honestly, Xanadu may be realizable. That this idea that Ted Nelson had may be something that you could build in a VR environment or an XR environment. So I think there's a potential here with XR to bend both space and time simultaneously, to be able to see things in a different way, just by being able to mess with those two factors in unexpected ways. Now, the reality of where we are with XR at this point is we're very early in its evolution. And I remember a long time ago, my good friend Brian, who's here with us today, gave a talk about these two different layers of technology, and we've spent the last since yesterday going, okay, what do we actually call these things? And so he's in the process we're in the process of giving him names, but this idea that all technology goes through a two-step process. The first step, we're imitating existing modes and things that we can do, right? So you go from from a carriage to a horseless carriage, right? That's the jump, right? And then I don't know if these are permanent names, but Brian and I sort of hacked into adoptive and transformative as the two phases. So that's the adoptive phase. You're adopting the new technology, but you're bending it to the realities that you conceptually understand, okay? And so for instance, in XR, I saw a headline just this morning that I think it was the University of Illinois, they're doing a play in a VR environment, right? Well, okay, that's great. And maybe they're doing some interesting things there, and I haven't looked at the project in detail, but it's still a play, right? And so at some point, we're gonna start bending that reality in ways that are not based on traditional modes. Another good example, by the way, another good analogy is when TV first started, they essentially did radio plays on TV for a number of years before they suddenly figured out, hey, we can do this differently. Same thing with theater and early film, same deal. For the first 15, 20 years, they were imitating the old art form and putting it into just using the new technology to pull it off. Then they figured out how to do cuts and all this other stuff. So we are clearly still in the adoptive phase when it comes to XR. And as much as we'd like to just flip a switch and go into this transformative phase where it really reshapes everything we do, where that technology really reshapes everything we do, we're not there yet. And I'm not, I think we're right on the precipice of that. A number of years ago, Dean at Rice University, Sidney Burris, was giving a talk, and he was riffing off of, actually, at some point he had encountered Brian and picked up the same idea. And he said, most of us technology people live in the transformative or in the second phase. Almost no one else does. And there's no skipping that first step. So, but I'd like us to sort of imagine a little bit what that looks like, right? The other advantage of where we are with XR is that since the tools are still in their infancy at a certain level, and we're still trying to hack over what the standards are going to be or what the tools themselves are going to look like. This gives us an opportunity to do something that I've been wanting to do all along with this project, is that, really prioritize those tasks and then think about what kind of tools would be built around the tasks. And so I challenge you guys as we do this hacking to think about those tasks. Yeah, I know. Brian, I'm looking at Brian's comment about wanting to add a C and turn it into cats, and I understand that coming from Brian, but I just can't get that bad movie musical out of my head whenever I think of that. Maybe it's the time. Cerebral. I like recursive personally. That spells rats. Okay. Anyway, so what are these tasks that we're talking about? These are the same 6+1 tasks that we talked about in the first two hackathons. Acquisition, inquiry, practice, production, discussion, collaboration. These are from Diana Laurillard's book in 2012, 2013, Teaching as a Design Science. And it's an excellent book, highly recommended. And she's obviously someone who's very much a person who's she was originally working for the Open University in Britain, and she was ultimately vice provost there. She's gone on to doing outside stuff now, but she very much has had to confront this what is teaching really about throughout her entire career, because the Open University was very much a hold my beer project at certain levels, because they were trying to do something that no one else had ever done before with technology that wasn't quite ripe yet. And so she's written a number of excellent things over the years. And this is kind of a nice breakdown of these are the things we want our students to be able to do. She does have a chapter in this book on motivation, which is it's not that she doesn't recognize this, but I do think we need to have it doesn't fall neatly into one of her 6 categories. So I've kind of done this 6+1, and I've added this category of curiosity is what I call it. But curiosity is basically motivation. How do we get our students interested in looking at this stuff? And that's a particular worry of mine, because the course that I teach the most is a required course that everyone has to take and no one wants to take. So getting them to getting them to engage is 80 to 90% of the battle most of the time. So, because if you can't win this one, you're never going to win. If you can't win curiosity, you're never going to win any of the other 6s, because they're just not going to do those things. So how can we use these tools in that way? So the hackathon is all about connecting up these 7 items to these tool sets. All right, and that's the work that we're doing, and that's what I want us to be able to do today. So I've initially divided up the XR, which I call combinatorial, because it's kind of smashing all of the things together in different ways, into these 3 areas. And by the way, this is a tentative list. There's a box there that says make more tools kind of thing. But I think, one way of looking at this is breaking this down into, augmented reality, the kind of things that where you still are interacting with the outside world, but with supplemental information. You have fully immersive environments, which, is about the experience in many cases. This would be, for instance, one example would be the Illinois thing, where they're creating a fully immersive play. I assume they put you in the middle of it, which is cool. I think you can do some interesting stuff. Theater in the round, where it's around you. Duck, here comes the knife. And then this is something for the. Maybe we should do that for the unconference. And then what I call immersive problem solving, thinking about ways in which we can engage higher levels of problem solving than are technically feasible in a normal physical environment, because they're too dangerous, because they're too distant. For whatever reason, you don't want to do these things for real, but you can build a simulation of what it's like to jump out of an airplane or something like that. Okay. So these are all ways in which I think you could use XR. Just sort of giving you an overview of the process here real quick. We've already done the first 2 hackathons. This is number 3. Again, there's no test for the previous hackathons, so these are all meant to be separate items. But I do want to encourage you to continue to engage with the Mural Board and the Google Doc between sessions. I'm checking those things periodically and using them to sort of compile and figure out what we're talking about, trying to make a lot of sense out of the patterns that are emerging from this group. At the unconference now, we are going to have the 4th session, essentially, where we're going to try to construct environments based on the insights that we've gotten from the first 3 hackathons. So there'll be more on that coming later. So just to sort of give you a sense. And the ultimate idea here is that at the end of the year, or maybe early next year, depending on workloads and resources and so on, that we would produce a booklet that goes through and looks at each one of those 7 areas, and then identifies tools that you can associate and use, and that this would be a guide that the teachers could use as they're constructing learning experiences for their students. Can also be something that we could bring to administrators as a logic for purchasing certain kinds of devices, certain kinds of capabilities, saying, look, this is how we have to do how we have to want to do practice in the classroom. Okay, on to the work. So what I'd like to do, how many people do we have today? I lost count.
16.
16. I think we'll just stay in one group for that. Okay, in the past hackathons, we've broken up into 2 different groups based on the two different areas we were looking at. But today I'm going to say we do the mashup and we all kind of work together on this. And let me drop these links into the chat so they're actually clickable for you. All right, let me get out of this. I'm gonna lose the share here. All right. That's okay, because I'm going to change shares anyway. So this is the Mural Board that will probably, it's been my experience that most people spend most of their time on this, on that part of it. But the Google Doc is, also important for two reasons. One is I want to make sure everybody is identified in that. So please, if you aren't already on there, there's a list at the beginning for people to identify themselves and that they've been a part of this process, because I want to make sure everybody gets full credit for playing along. And so make sure you get that in there. But also, this is a way, I mean, the limitations of the Mural document is the depth that's available in any sort of concept mapping document. And so if you feel like you want to go and make a deeper observation about what you're working on the Mural document, the Google Doc is the place to do that. They'll come together in the end there. The other thing is, when you're putting things on the Mural document, especially if you're doing the speech bubble or something like that, make sure you put your tag it with your name, so that I can get a sense of who's doing what. Also, that way, if I have questions later on and go, okay, what did so and so, what did Jody mean by when she put this down? Then I will know that to go find Jody, right? So let's dive into it. So talk about, feel free to unmute and talk to each other in terms of, and also, jump into the document. I'm going to pull that up as a screen share. And I certainly don't want to be the only one talking for 90 minutes.
Understandable.
Not like in my school, not like in my classes. Okay, so the green area is what we're working on today primarily, and that's toward the bottom of the board. As you can see, the board is kind of monstrous. Feel free to peruse the earlier work, because that's up there in the other areas. Whoa. And see how they did it. It's if you look here at this area, you will see. Ultimately, I've opened up this middle area because this is where I'm going to rebuild everything, and we'll work in the middle area once we get to the unconference. That's sort of my tentative idea there. But you can see how people identified, their ideas here in terms of what the connection is, and it can be pretty short. If you want to put in a link, that's great. I see some people did that too, so that gives you a sense of how it was done in the other ones. It's funny because one group did the speech bubbles and the other group connected things up with the Post-it notes. So, and then I see James is here, and James went completely outside the box, which is fine too. If you also want to connect up, make connections to the other tools, that's fine at this point. But
so I have a general kind of question or comment
Yep.
about whether motivation and curiosity, like how separate they are from what you might call like structural or tool-based parameters that you could change. There's a sense to me that some of these tools will be exciting, just fundamentally, intrinsically motivating when they're novel, and then will we come to a point where they are not as novel, and will we have to figure out how to? Will we have a free ride for a little bit integrating these tools into learning settings, because it'll just be interesting?
I agree. Yeah. So I would say two things there. One is I remember a college that shall remain nameless about 15 years ago spent $100,000 buying iPhones for students, thinking they would do all these cool things without any real clear idea what they were going to do. And the major finding from that effort was students like getting free iPhones. So yeah, you got to get past the tool to the task. To me, is how do we use these tools to stimulate that deeper meaning of, that deeper motivation about the ideas that are underneath the tools, and how well do the tools show that? That's what should be exciting, and highlighting those things. I think, and I think it doesn't matter what tool it is. You can be very excited with a piece of paper and a pencil, right? So, I mean, there's not a lot of novelty left with that, but you can definitely, so that's how I would answer that question. I think that for it to really, I think the task is what needs to stimulate the curiosity. Then the tool is a way of getting you to that quicker, or getting you to that more deeply than would otherwise be the case. But it's really the task and getting excited about the task. And how can the tool make you excited about the task, not about the tool? Yes, there's always a gee whiz wow factor, and I hate that. I really do. And I also don't tend to fall for it, which probably drives a lot of tool vendors really crazy. Because I say, well, okay, this is really cool, but where's the beef? How am I actually going to use this? But good question. Fresh pencils. Yeah, good luck finding a pencil sharpener these days. I'm sure I do somewhere too. I've largely transitioned to mechanical pencils though. But I don't use pencils that much anymore either. Good. I hope they're doing cool things with them, Jenna. I would love it. Well, yeah, my kids steal everything that's not tied down, but oh, that's awesome. All right. Now, of course, the problem with not doing the breakout rooms is there's going to be long silences on the recording as everybody's. It's like the moment where everybody first gets their food and this conversation dies because everybody's eating.
Well, if it's too awkward, I will just trim it out of the recording and skip straight to the next big conversation.
Okay. I won't feel too much pressure to be performative.
No, you're good. That's whatever you want. So we're looking to connect these
tools on the bottom
back,
here.
Yeah,
yep.
to the
red circles.
Yes.
And what I did that is a little different. As part of my cleanup, I decided it was just too hard to keep a single set of those practices. So I made multiple sets of those practices, one for each tool group, essentially. So that's why these are just duplicated from the ones on top. What I'm going to do as my next step is flip that. And so I'm going to end up with one set of red dots with green and blue and orange or tan, whatever color that is, tool sets hanging off of them. That's the next step. But we need to fill in the last set of blanks. Our resident XR expert, or one of them, is Emery. Do you have anything in particular to add and thoughts that in terms of what I said, or just in general? Not to
No, a
put you on
little
the
bit
spot.
of, no, no, not at all. No problem at all. I mean, I'm having a little trouble figuring out how to put these in these boxes because as Brian and I were talking about in the chat earlier, I just see XR as such an experiential technology as opposed to one of our traditional technologies. And because of that, it kind of flows into all different things. I mean, at a certain level, you can, anything that you can do in real life, you can do in XR. Not necessarily now, but you will be able to. So on some levels, I don't really see it as a tool so much as an experience, which makes it really hard to, I guess, kind of categorize this. And I also think that while some parts of XR are, let's say, very traditional in some ways, we've done simulations in science and medicine forever, and XR is just a better way of doing those. There are other aspects that XR does things entirely differently. In sociology, most students don't get to do sociology. What do you do in higher education? You read sociologists, you read archaeologists, you know, you read about others who did it at one time. You read about, you read philosophers who did philosophy, but you're not really doing it yourself. Whereas in XR, you actually have the opportunity to do it. So I see it in those fields as being much more transformative, which is why I've always thought XR in the liberal arts is going to be so groundbreaking. You know, what it does in the sciences and medicine is amazing, but just piggybacks off of what has already been going on there. In other words, a better form of simulation. What it does in the liberal arts to me is completely transformative.
Right, exactly. But I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things I like about Laurel Ard's breakdown is that it really gets to basic ways that humans learn, and so coming up with some interesting, and these, by the way, in this one, you know, as I said, this is kind of speculative. So if you've got something real, that's great, but don't feel too constrained by that. Just, you know, say, okay, if I really wanted to change how we engage with practice and with our students, how could I use an XR tool of one of these or one that you add to it, and in a way that would change how we do practice, right? Or curiosity or whatever, engage people. That's, you know, and by the way, the same thing can connect up to multiple pieces there. There's, as you can see, whoever did this blue one here, they've connected up to multiple bubbles there, so that's fine.
Yeah.
So.
And I kind of think the Laurel Ard framework still comes in, but in some ways, in some respects, it can come in within an XR experience. But I would also say that you end up framing the XR experience with that. You know, one of the things I'm always doing in my workshops and when I talk to people is it's not just what you do in XR, it's what you do right before you do XR, and it's what you're going to do after XR, because that's going to be the time when you can reflect on it. Because when you're in the midst of the experience, it's very challenging to have a moment of reflection unless the experience builds that in. But you really need to be able to step back from the experience afterwards. In other words, you take off the headset, you take off the glasses, and then you begin to analyze, reflect on what actually transpired within the experience, the virtual experience.
Either that or you become violently ill.
Oh, yeah, well, that's true.
Well, so I guess, Emery, I'm wondering if that point, I mean, that's a really powerful point, but I'm wondering if that has to do with the novelty of using the tool. Like, will there be more opportunities within the experience to, as people get more familiar with it?
That's a really good point, James. And I do think as we get better at designing XR experiences, we will build moments in for reflection, but that doesn't happen right now. because we tend to just go, oh, let's do the experience. And we want a really good, amazing experience, which is wonderful. But then what happens is you step out of it and you have to, okay, now I have to process all this. But, you know, where I've seen really well done virtual experiences, it leaves you moments to stop and reflect. There's another challenge here, of course, is that we don't spend all that much time in VR experiences right now. The average time is 30 to 40 minutes. And that's just because our headsets are too heavy. It's, you know, it's just unwieldy. It's going to get different 3, 4, 5 years down the road when we can wear a headset for a good part of the day, when that headset can flip from augmented reality to mixed reality to full virtual reality. So that's that, you know, the technology is going to change the options there. But I do agree with you, there's a novelty element here, and some of that novelty element may preclude the opportunities for reflection and analysis inside the experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it makes me think, I was at mini golf yesterday, which sounds random, I know, but just, I was trying to show some kids this, like, it's very small movements that are most effective, you know, and I'm imagining, you know, a lot of what I've been imagining with integrating these tools into some of the learning interventions I'm planning is these kind of transformative experiences, but I'm realizing that that could be disruptive. There could be easier integration if it's as far as learning principles being you know, really sticking for long term, if the augmentation is more subtle.
Yeah.
Right. And in some ways, the AR experience is something I think that the augmented reality, as opposed to the fully immersive experience, is something that could be interesting there, because it's kind of, you can set it up in such a way that it's kind of the little devil on your shoulder or voice in your ear talking as you're doing things in a real world environment, right? So I would love to have an AR thing where I could be walking around outside and I see, you know, I see a bird and I go, what kind of bird is that? And it will tell me, right? That would be useful, right? That would be, well, not useful, but interesting at least. But you know,
so Tom,
especially with my wife always asking me that, what bird is that? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that.
Go ahead. Henry, sorry.
Okay, I was just going to say that AR is going to be much more informational. I mean, obviously with AR, what we're going to be able to do is what we currently do with our smartphones, which right now we have to, if we want to know something, we have to pick up our smartphone, we have to, you know, go to Wikipedia or whatever, maybe take a photo of it or something like that. But, you know, one assumes with AR 5 to 10 years down the road, in fact, we've already been able to do that. I mean, even the Bose AR audio glasses were kind of amazing. It's a dead project now, but you know, we'll just kind of walk down the street and we'll have, we'll look at a bird and we'll go, what kind of bird is that? Or what kind of person is that? Or what kind of, you know, all this stuff.
Right.
That's going to be a much more informational thing, and in some respects is related to VR, but it's also very different than that, because VR again is fully immersive.
Right.
I'm
reminded of
mixed reality.
Yeah.
You know, mixed reality falls somewhere in the middle of all this. So, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, I'm reminded of a book from, geez, it's got to be more than 10 years now. Daniel Suarez's Demon. And the comment there, you know, the thing is, not only could they see who the person was, they could see their credit score. And stuff like that.
It's gonna get so scary. I mean, if you, this is why we're doing the thing at ShapingEDU at the Unconference. If you think we have ethical challenges now with social media, you've seen nothing yet. You know, what's to come is going to be so mind-blowing in both a good and in a dystopian way. And you know, we're going to have to deal with all this.
Right. Exactly.
Because we'll be able to, you know, I don't know what we're going to be able to know about other people. I mean, that's something we're going to have to work out.
Right, and thinking about the AI, you know, the biases that get baked in just incidentally with even well-meaning attempts to classify right speech and things like that, can it just be amplified? It sounds like without careful attention.
And that's also something that has to be built in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Sorry,
think
Emily.
you're right, James, is that sometimes it's the well-meaning intentions that can go wrong. People don't realize that what they're doing can backfire and you know, lead to very bad negative consequences.
Mhm. I mean, I think we're still adjusting mentally around the panopticon that we live in now. And for those of you who've looked at Jeremy Bentham from the prison that he designed that everybody can be seen in. But you know, we live in that environment now to more and more extent, and you know, how do we deal with that? So,
right. Well, I mean, just
look
at our current look at our current situation. We have an ex-president, regardless of what you think of him, who has lost his place in social media, has had his voice removed in social media, and you know, how do you make those determinations? I mean, right now, those are private companies that are doing that. And that's, you know, it's interesting, and it has, you know, potentially very negative consequences down the road in terms of who has the ability to speak, who has voice and who doesn't.
Right, exactly. I mean,
You know,
I have hope that over time that, you know, there's a leveling effect. It's just a delayed, you know, the digital divide is real, but it's you know, it's different now than it was in 2005. And of course, we have the big broadband project, which is a big part of that. But I think there's a realization now that has a minimum has to be fixed. And then, but the tools on top of that you can use. I mean, you can get a Chromebook for $150 that gets you on the internet. You know.
Yeah, right. Still tough in many parts of the world, but it is changing. But I think certainly the corollary, of course, to the broadband project has to be a digital literacy project, because just because you can get online doesn't mean you know what to do when you are online, or that you know how to handle the information that you're seeing online.
Right. Let's start with Congress on that one.
Yeah.
I see people are definitely adding stuff down here. This is great. Yeah, don't worry about making a mess. That's, you know, I spent a lot of time cleaning up the other ones, but they were a mess to begin with. But you know, as long as I can sort of figure it out. But that's the cool thing about this. I mean, I really had to think hard about how I was going to unsort what I call the flying spaghetti monster that was created in the other two hackathons, and how to present that in a way that I could visually make sense of. And with a few exceptions, and I think James was the primary culprit there, if I'm not mistaken, that I was able to do that. I had one person who, for whatever reason, didn't make a linkage, and I don't know where this one goes. And that's I was, you know, I'll figure it out as part of it.
Tom, are we going to have access to this after the session is over today?
It's on. Yes. I've never locked it down. So okay. Yes.
Just because I'm spending so much time talking to you guys, I'm not really getting much chance to jump in on this, and I'll try to do some more later on. And I know Maya couldn't be here today because of a scheduling conflict, but I know she'd also have some wonderful stuff to contribute to the Mural Board. So
yeah, absolutely, and feel free to share.
Okay.
So I mean, the idea here is, I mean, this process of what I call digital constructivism. Is this, you know, punctuated live sessions connected by an active work product. And I've been doing this on a certain level in my classes, but I find that this is a really interesting way to build stuff that grows and is tangible, in a sense that that a lot of times with workshops, you go in, you do your thing, and then you leave and it's gone, you know, or you have a little thing that you built in the workshop, right? And that was the extent of it, right? And I have some cool souvenirs from that. And this right here is from the NMC Black Swan event from 2012, and I built this there out of a Lego kit. This is my monster drone. And it's still great. That still graces my desk to this day. And that's fun, but it's a story. We talked about artifacts last time and the creation of artifacts. Trying to find my way around the board. Definitely zooming in and out on this is a real. But
What,
this is. But this isn't.
Question?
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask a question here. What do you mean by the box where it says VR immersive shadowing? Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Oh, where you would have somebody who had a camera or some sort of a device, and you would say follow a doctor around for the day if you're in medical school, and then be essentially looking through his eyes or her eyes as they go through their day or whatever whatever kind of training you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
But then you would experience that vicariously or remotely because you couldn't be there because there's something that's across the country that's or for whatever reason it's not safe, that sort of thing. Yeah, and these are not established technical concepts at this point. And I think I kind of did a mental thought exercise as to get an initial list, but it's not definitive. I would say that.
Okay.
That's part of what the goal here is. If you've got something that doesn't seem to fit under one of those existing tools, add one. This is as much about adding tools. Okay.
Sure.
Because I know I'm not omniscient with these things, and I admit a certain level of ignorance when it comes to XR. I just haven't delved into it. I've been too busy trying to sort out the quote unquote normal stuff. In learning spaces or virtual spaces and so on and so forth. We have a lot of work to do there too. But and I forgot where I was going with this, looking at this. Oh, that's right. I was looking for my loose ends. So with this many people hitting the board. But by the way, VR, XR, the one thing that would make this Mural experience even better is if we were all in a VR environment with these concepts floating around us and could walk
3D.
around things, right? It's 3D concept mapping, which that would be, that's the limitation because I've got this big board now, and the only way I can make, sort it out is by making it bigger and pulling things apart so that I can figure out the connections there. And it's doable, but it's kind of clunky in some ways.
Tilt brush. You just would have had to put some work into it. You could have done it in Tilt brush.
Yeah, there's also that is a factor too. I mean, certainly a lot of times I will avoid early stage technologies because it's just too much damn work.
I understand. It is too much damn work now. But it gets easier as every month goes by. Right,
and I want what I want to put my work into is as JCR Licklider said, the non-clerical part of the task. Right, he said back in 1960 that as he thought through a lot of his tasks, something like 80+% of it was just clerical stuff, and we've made that a lot better. But there's still some, we also have raised the bar at the same time. Let me see here. Okay. Yeah, this is a little slow with everybody hitting it. I don't know if that's just me or what.
I think the opportunities on the production side are kind of powerful, but underconnected at this point still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I said in the presentation, it's okay to be a little speculative. Think about what you could do there. And then, I think what I'm going to end up doing as I try to sort this out in the final guide is to say, these are areas where we still need better tools. And I think that'll come up in all categories, but I definitely think it'll happen in the XR category. What did I do there? How did I do? Okay. See, I'm fighting with the tool. I hate fighting with tools. I mean, that's a huge motivator for me. It's always been a motivator for me. If you ultimately, when I finally get my book out on this called Discovering Digital Humanity, which should hopefully be out later this year, I talk a lot about how I approach my tools, and that I've always approached my tools in terms of I want to do something. I want to do X. Damn it, tool, let me do X. That's been from the get-go. When I got my first computer back in 1981, I wanted it to do what I had done on the Rice mainframe 4 or 5 years earlier, and I spent a lot of time trying to get it to do my Apple II do that, and that kind of set the tone from that point forward. Hey, Ruben, welcome. All right, so we're digging around in the sandbox. We didn't do breakouts today, Ruben, so we're all together.
Hey, Ruben, how you doing?
Pretty good. Good seeing you all.
Oh, all right. So. There we go. This is what I'm looking for here. Okay. So yeah, this black line is the one that wasn't connected at the tool end, and I had no idea where the intention was for it to go. See, is the author here? Make it bigger so I can actually read it. Marissa. I don't think Marissa's here, is she? No, I'll find her. So Brian, your tag here that says gaming is actually quite broad. Do you want to drill down on that a little bit, maybe?
Sure. I was just putting it out there to provoke, and
Okay.
also I wanted to see what would happen if there was a tag that people could actually read easily.
Yeah, again, this is one of those problems. The zooming in and out of this,
Well, it makes it seem like monolithic, like it can't be changed, like it's it seems too big now, too big to fail.
Right. That's what Ozymandias said. I think I talked about that in the last presentation. But yes, feel free to provoke all you like, Brian. I highly encourage provocation.
I threw in a Star Trek visualization already. We'll see what that does.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that's where it all started with me trying to get that Star Trek game going. That's what I'm looking for. But don't forget, the link to the Google Doc is on the board as well as in the chat. So if you're new to the game, feel free to please put your name on there so we know who you are. So
Tom, I'm cleaning up my previous comments from earlier things too.
Okay. Okay. Great. I have Marissa's contact. I can find her. See, that's why we did this. So I'll give people a couple of minutes here. Maybe we can talk about some of these and get some discussion going around them. So who did is this also you, Brian, the live collaborative content mapping on shared digital projected screens?
I don't
That
think
was
so.
me. I was moving that from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Make sure you connect it at the other end.
Right. Right.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't used Miro much, you can these little buttons on the sides here allow you to just sort of drag an arrow across. It's rather nifty. As a person who's used Mind Manager, MindNode, Draw.io, I actually, from a UI perspective, Miro actually works pretty well. I haven't had any massive complaints yet. They all have their quirks. There's no perfect way to do this until maybe you go into the VR environment.
Like you said, 3D. Yep.
I mean, it's a fundamental thing. We don't think in 2 dimensions. I mean, we think in 3 dimensions. And so, especially when we're talking about thinking collectively, that the canvases that emerge from that are, anytime you put them down on paper, anytime you put them down, even in a graphical way like this, you're losing some aspect of that. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at is, how can we use XR to solve that problem or make it better? By the way, another way you could use virtual shadowing would be to, follow someone around from a different culture or even a different part of your culture to see the digital divide from the other side or something like that. I think that would be a very powerful teaching tool and might help break down some of the divisions that we're struggling with as humans. One of the more impactful things I ever saw done on Second Life was somebody did a thing of, they created an environment that was mimicking what it was like to be schizophrenic. And you literally walk through a schizophrenic mind. And that was really interesting. That's kind of unique to that kind of environment.
There's a really, really good one done, I think, by the BBC in collaboration with a nonprofit over in the UK on dementia, and it's a first-person experience of dementia, and it's just absolutely breathtaking, and it's just 360 video, but it's just so good at showing you how you don't recognize the people you're supposed to recognize, how a puddle in the sidewalk suddenly starts to look like a void that you could fall into, the person gets scared, nervous, she loses her way, and it's a simple little scenario of the woman is walking home with her son after buying groceries, and her whole world just falls apart, and you're seeing this all firsthand, and it's just such a powerful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another example, I guess, of virtual shadowing.
Yeah, shadowing, or really, it's almost more than shadowing. It's kind of like virtual embodiment. So, in a sense, you're embodying the other person or the other person's life.
Well, that's cool, Jenna. What platform do they work on? How do you view them?
I'm still trying to figure that out. He just shared it with me recently, but it seemed to fit the discussion. It seems like you basically pay for a tour guide to walk around with like maybe a 360 camera, maybe a GoPro. I'm not sure yet. To be determined.
Right.
Or to be learned.
I mean, we had, you know, I mean, QuickTime VR is what, 30 years old, 25 years old now, something like that. So I still remember that same conference where Brian was talking about the technology modes. Our friend Jared Bendis wandering around with a camera on a pole, 360, just creating a virtual map of everywhere he went. Right, and he's the mad scientist that does all that sort of stuff. But that was, you know, that was 2006. So. Yes, excellent. We save the chat stream, don't we, Laura? Yeah, okay, good. Where can you find that after the fact if you're not godlike? Or is that anywhere? Or do you send it around?
Yeah, so I haven't been sending it around. At the moment, everyone can save a copy if they wish. If you'd like, I can include it in the recap email. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I mean, whatever people want, but there's some good stuff in there. So the problem I have is I never remember to save it before the session ends, and then it's gone. At least on my end. I have this problem with my classes too.
Tom, I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes because I actually have another meeting coming up. So I'm going to have, unfortunately, I'm going to have to jump out before the end of the session. So.
Oh, no worries. And I really appreciate you coming and providing your insight and expertise to this. It was great. I do appreciate that.
Thank you so much. And I'll try to contribute some more to the board afterwards. So.
Okay, please do. And feel free to share it with Maya as well.
Okay, definitely will. Okay, thanks, guys.
All right. Bye. Oh, there go my dog. Okay. It's too early for package deliveries. supposed to have some guys come out this morning, and we just had solar put on the house, and they were when we went the other day to turn it on, nothing happened. And so they opened up the box and discovered the wires weren't actually connected. And there was only one guy, and apparently they needed two guys to do it because they need a guy on the roof to figure out which wire is which, and the guy at the box to figure out which. And he only had one guy, so we're waiting for them to come back. But first world problems, I know. But I've got to run these Zoom sessions off of something, right? Might as well be sunlight. This is great stuff. Okay, so yeah, we got about 20-25 minutes to go. Anybody seeing something they hadn't seen before? Want to comment on that before I go in and start cherry picking? Yeah, so open-ended gaming in XR, that's a real challenge, I would think, in terms of the amount of data. Looking at Brian's comment here about role-playing games. Yeah, they come earlier, but for the most part, what do you live in San Francisco? No, just kidding, Eric. So the role-playing games, but the idea of an open-ended role-playing game or world-building playing game, you know, thinking of crap. What's the book I'm brain blanking on? The one where he's having to find all this, and it was a movie too. But okay, James, we'll miss you. Thank you for coming, and hopefully you can join us at the conference.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Yes, this is yeah. hate myself. I need to make that dementia video for Emory, but not being able to remember stuff. The VR in any case, but having that open-ended world, how do you execute on that? How do you create that to that level? We're starting to do it in some 2D environments, but
Tom, one thing that interested me was how people responded to your use of Loriard's key concepts, and partly I'm interested in a kind of quantitative level. That is, we really dug into the practice and inquiry bits, but production and discussion and acquisition trailed. So I'm just curious about that. I mean, we have a small sample size, but still, I'm curious what that might tell us about XR.
Yeah, and I was noticing that in the other two hackathons, that there were certain areas that tended, depending on which one, they tended to, I definitely intend to look at that and address that to a degree. I mean, my initial take, and anybody else who wants to jump in here, please do, is that the production aspects of it are challenging for normals. I mean, creating in a virtual environment is, or at least it's perceived as being challenging. I know Ruben has seen some projects that are pretty easy to create in, but the perception is that this is going to be hard to, you can't just hand this to a student and say, go for it. I feel like in some ways this Mural board is just now getting to a point where I can work with students on it, that it's not at a level where they're going to be fighting with the technology more than they are engaging with what we're trying to do with the technology. So, but that's my off the cuff observation on that. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I feel with Emory not here, I feel kind of like talking in class without the teacher around. But I wonder if part of the problem is not that on the production side, our tools are still so basic that and unsatisfying that that helps reduce that side. But also that the main use of VR and AR is pretty asocial. It's having Stephanie visualize that great castle behind her, but it's not so much us hanging out in the castle.
Right.
Exactly. The social potential is why Facebook invested in it, and it's huge, and we know it can be powerful. But that might be just a reflection of where we stand now in 2021.
Right. I mean, I know people are looking at it as an entertainment option, but there's a certain value to that in the learning process, but it only gets you so far. So,
I was going to say, again, it's interesting though, because I think you're right that a lot of the stuff that's done with the Oculus type devices does tend to be independent experiences, although there's quite a bit of shared experiences within a given space. But I don't know if Emory talked about this before I got here, but I did a lot of work when Google was still pushing the Google Cardboard platform pretty heavily. And it was pretty easy to author in. And in fact, for instance, an experiment I did some years back, it was, in Copenhagen, several people had done different apps that overlaid information about the history of the city over the city. Very low level use of AR, very low level. Okay, nothing terribly fancy.
I saw that in Amsterdam too, I think.
Yeah, very simple, but it worked very well. It really worked. It was unintrusive. And it was the sort of thing which was a pass around type of experience of, geez, hey, take a look at this. Wow, I didn't know that this was, where the former cavalry stables were built in one case, etc. And that's, I think, where I think a lot of the potential is. It's not the fanciest stuff, but it's the stuff that makes it pervasive, that, either puts a layer on the world or allows you to play in a shared space in the world. And there have also been several apps that have allowed you to author relatively easily games in VR space, and again, intended for use with an Android phone, an iPhone, an iPad, whatever, a tablet of any sort. Nothing fancy in terms of things, but some pretty interesting exploration stuff was created on this. So, I mean, that's been an experience. I have done some work with the Oculus stuff, although of course nowhere near the level that people like Emery and Maya have done. And it's fun, but it is both tougher, as frankly, the lifting is much tougher in terms of the software to create, at least at this point in time. And it's harder to make it participatory. You have to be thinking a lot more about what type of thing will call out to somebody else over the network, to participate.
Does anybody know where one of the more interesting projects that I saw, where's WordPress for VR? Exactly. But Minecraft, that Microsoft was starting to play with Minecraft in a VR space. And this was 3 or 4 years ago I saw this, and I have not seen or heard much since then about it. Does anybody know anything about where that is? Because that was the beauty behind Minecraft. It's just the ease of the accessibility of it, in terms of being able to build stuff, almost a Lego-like experience. I think that may be a really good first step. One of the big problems with Second Life was that it was so complex to build stuff. The learning curve there was, and I know people spend an insane amount of time learning how to turn themselves into peacocks, but it just never appealed to me. Ruben, do you know where Microsoft is on the Minecraft VR thing? Anything
I
there?
don't, Tom, to be honest with you. It's I don't know anybody on that team, so sorry, can't help you there. But I was going to put in the chat, this is one of the tools. It's unfortunately not supported anymore, but that's Aris. And that was a tool that was used to make several things. There was a little project on James Joyce and walking James Joyce's Dublin that was made in Aris. I made some mini role-playing games in Aris, exploratory games to give people a sense of the history of a place by playing a small exploratory game in that space that brought them closer to events. And that was an easy one to use. You may still be able to run it. It did, last time I tried it, it was getting pretty buggy, but it gives you an idea of what this simple tool can be. And if you give me a sec, there's one other one. Let me get you a URL for it. It's 1 second.
Right, Andrew. That's a good point about when this stuff migrates to the phone. The more stuff that migrates to the phone, the more this will open up. But again, there's also a lag time there of getting to that point with phones. Although even the poorest of my students seem to be able to figure out a way to get an iPhone. More often than not.
Not to trigger religious war, Tom, but what about Android phones? They are less expensive, and most of your students are economically challenged.
Right, and well, I'm just saying, the comment I'm trying to make there was, you would think that they would go Android, but even they figure out ways to get the more expensive phone. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I live in the Apple world myself. The ease in which you can transfer from various platforms is something that's frustratingly difficult on Android. That Apple has done really well, and that's because they control. They're godlike, right? So.
Yeah, it's also it's an interesting question because, for instance, Apple just added LiDAR to several of its devices. And interestingly, that LiDAR has been around the place on the Android world before this, but I haven't seen that much. Really, there's been some use of it, don't make no mistake, but Apple is pushing it heavily as an easy way to get into the AR world, for instance. So it's an interesting question of chicken and egg, right? The Android people had the hardware, but there wasn't, in the platform itself, it wasn't pushed as, Samsung wasn't pushing it as heavily, I think, Apple is right now. So it'll be interesting to see. I've also put in the chat the link to for people who have an iPad, an app that works on the iPad, again, for relatively easy creation of augmented reality type of work. And one of the nice things is there are some of these AR apps that are very single point. So if you make a 3D object, it's very oriented to just the AR work. And this particular one starts to work and say, well, what if we bring in 3D printers into the picture? And what if we bring in, you know, papakura, so paper craft, into the picture? And so it starts to say, well, maybe one of the easier ways to get people into this is to have them see how they can make objects that can be multi-purposed. So it's not just, well, I made this, but now it's locked into a proprietary AR model. And again, it's a much more direct app than saying, okay, let me teach you how to code in Unity. You know, it's not that hard to teach people to code in Unity, but you do have to know at least some coding before you can start to use it. It's not, I would not recommend showing somebody that if they've never programmed in their lives before, whereas some of these I could say, sure, you know, it's like any drawing app, etc. And again, I do keep coming back. Let me be very, very clear here. You are not going to make the amazing worlds that I've seen Emory and Maya play with, but it's a good gateway into the world. You know, so if you can say to somebody, hey, you can make an object and you can position it in a room you're sitting in, you can walk around it and you know, see what happens. That's encouraging. It's you know, it's an interesting thing. And then again, as I say, if you have suppose you're working with an art class, right, and you're having them design a sculpture piece, and they can do the prototypes in AR, and then you can say, well, okay, now you can throw this at the 3D printer. You know, you're giving a rationale for this, not just, okay, cool, but what else? So, but again, I do keep coming back to,
yeah. Some of the stuff, I mean, I found a picture that at one point, I can't remember where I used it, but a picture that Alan took in 2009 of like AR stuff at an NMC event. And, you know, people were already playing with it back then. So, you know, you got to think in terms of that curve of simplicity and accessibility moving in that direction. I don't know to what extent that curve is subject to Moore's law or some version of Moore's law, but it's, you know, certainly there. I mean, the kind of things you can do on an iPhone now versus what was possible on a BlackBerry in 2005. You know, think through that for a little while. You know, we forget. You know, it's like watching our kids grow up. Suddenly they're big, right? And you go, what? Wait a minute. What happened to that little kid that? You know, spoken as someone whose son just graduated from high school a few weeks ago. It's one of those sobering moments in life, like, holy crap. Okay, great. Yeah, some good stuff. We're kind of toward the end here. I'm going to, I just noticed your picture, Brian. That's great. I assume you're responsible for the city on the edge of forever. Wasn't that Natalie Wood? Serves. So let me flip back here real quick and just sort of give a quick nod, and then I'll let Laura take it from there, talking about upcoming events. And thank you, everybody, for your participation and adding to this. Do this first. Adding to this conversation in new and interesting ways. Here, oops, with too many layered apps. It'd be nice if I could just sort of 3D virtually pull things in and out of our environment. So where we left our story last time, please feel free to continue working. This is a you know, ongoing project. We will, you know, and I will stitch things together in between, clean up some before the unconference. I actually had an idea just as we were talking today of switch shares here real quick. Just realized I'm still on the Mural board. There we go. But that maybe we want to create a challenge base or series of challenges in the conference that we can then address with interesting application of tool sets from insights we've learned from this. But I'm going to play with that some between now and then. Don't want to lock down too much. But this was always intended as a series of punctuated events connected by the Mural board as well as the Google Doc to where we can continue to contribute to this as a design team, a collective design team. And then after the unconference, I will once again attempt to make sense of this and turn it into a linear document of some sort that we can then share, and we'll see where that goes. And I've kind of thought as I was considering this, the event at the unconference is going to be a hackathon. It's going to be a packathon. We've been pulling everything apart for the last 3 sessions. Now we're going to pack it all back together again and make something new, right? So please register for the unconference. That's coming up end of July. Laura will give you more details. And I created a bit.ly event to the a bit.ly event, a bit.ly link to the unconference, but there are many other links out there too. With that in mind, I'm going to hand over the baton back to Laura. Thank you again. Any last thoughts from anybody otherwise? I think please save the chat stream. So other than that, hope this was
fantastic.
Thank you to Tom, if I could. Thank you for leading today's session with such incredible depth of knowledge, with a great sense of humor, with supporting all of us in our quirky cat-like behavior, and doing an awful lot of work. Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you. I'm good at cat herding. I have multiple kids as well as lots of students, so get practice there.
Wonderful.
Go ahead, Laura.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been fascinating. And I know that it's part of an ongoing effort, and there's a concrete output that all of this will become in the upcoming months, so that all of your insights can be shared. And I know Tom shared a document for you to add your name as a co-author of the resulting resource. Stay tuned for more from Tom and this project. And we very much
and
hope
if you
to
lose
see
the Google link,
yeah.
it's also on the Mural board, right? So it's there too. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
No, that's an excellent reminder. I guess we'll end just a couple minutes early and say hope to see you at the summer's unconference. In the meantime, keep dreaming, doing, and driving. Bye, everyone.